All right, I'd like to call to order the October 5th TAC meeting. First agenda item for us today is approval of the agenda, and that's really, we can go ahead and approve that moving forward if there are no objections. If anybody has any, please let me know. Otherwise, the agenda is adopted. All right, moving forward, we need approval of September 7th TAC meeting minutes. Joe, do you want to bring those up real quick so folks can see who attended quickly, and then we can roll through the meeting minutes.
Are they showing, Mr. Chair, or anyway?
They are not.
No, it's not.
What is? How about now?
Nope.
No.
I can see all the participants, but that's about it. There we go. Looks like you captured your screen. If you can make the minutes a little bit bigger, that'd be. There you go. All right, so folks can go ahead and see who attended from your respective agencies here. And with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the September 7th, 2022 Technical Advisory Committee meeting minutes. All right, I think I heard a motion by Brian. Is there a second?
Seconded, Innocent.
All right, thank you, Innocent. Appreciate that. All right, committee members, we have a motion and a second in front of us to approve the September 7th, 2022 Technical Advisory Committee meeting minutes. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson?
Aye.
Robgent?
Aye.
Labrie?
Aye.
Ellos?
Aye.
Isaacson?
Aye.
Breeze? She was at exec, so I'm guessing she'll be around. Leitner?
Aye.
Witter?
Aye.
Kotsukos?
Aye.
Peterson?
Aye.
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
Harrington? Metro Transit, anybody? Solberg?
Aye.
EO?
Innocent, I thought Innocent already said aye.
Yeah, you did, Innocent, but I didn't call your name, so I'll say.
Oh, I hear like Innocent.
Nope.
Okay, sorry. Hi.
Reeve?
Aye.
Fighton?
Aye.
Parthi?
Aye.
Eddie?
Aye.
DNR is still vacant. McCullough?
Aye.
Pedestrian is still vacant, but not for long. Keel? Howley?
I'll abstain. I was absent.
Oehme?
Aye.
Ellis?
Aye.
Kozlutstra, I believe. Brodhag, you're here for him.
Yes, and I'll abstain.
Ashfeld?
Aye.
Thompson?
Aye.
Culver?
Sorry, I just logged on, so I'm not even sure what we're voting on. So I'll abstain.
Just vote yes. This is the minutes. Hager?
Aye.
Vol?
I abstain. I was absent.
Hertz?
Aye.
And Dermody.
Aye.
All right, motion passes, minutes are approved. Moving on to the next item, public comment for on committee business. And this is an opportunity for the public to provide any comments to any of the business for TAC. Joe, was there anybody that registered prior to our meeting today?
No, there was not, Mr. Chair.
Right. All right, moving forward, we'll go to the tab report. Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met on September 21st. For the Chair's report, Vice Chair Debbie Gattell reported that Dan Keeley resigned as the Suburban Transit Association TAB representative, and STA appointed Gary Hansen to be their STA representative, and he had previously been in TAB as Metro City's appointment, so the recruiting to fill his open position now. MPCA, Todd Bewin reported that the Climate Action Framework was released and is online. For the Metropolitan Airports Commission, Carl Crimmins reported that the airlines are at 80 to 90% of their 2019 passenger levels, and there are now 34 airlines at MSP Airport, both terminals. And Transportation Network Committee companies have 28,000 licenses from the airport providing rides, and they also have a new provider, Turo, which is in use, which is peer-to-peer car rental, and they have a 1-year temporary agreement, and it's been successful. So they're looking at a long-term agreement, and which is leading to the car rentals being down 35%. Metropolitan Council report. Deb Barber reported that Metro Transit launched their microservice pilot program to improve connections in North Minneapolis, primarily to connect riders to the C line. The Transit Equity Work Group began meeting and is in the process of developing recommendations for the council. And Gold Line construction is starting, and October 19th is the groundbreaking. The Suburban Transit Association reported that ridership is starting to come back for the suburban providers, with the biggest increases being on their door-to micro transit services, and that was with all the providers. And then for action items, TAB approved the 2023 Unified Planning Work Program, the program year extension for I-35W continuous lighting, then Streamlined, and then there were several Streamlined tip amendments that came through TAC, Hennepin Avenue BRT platforms, Bruce Vento Trail extension, Coon Rapids Boulevard signal system, the Minnesota Highway 36 ramp reconstruction, and the Southwest Transit Mobility Hub. And they had 3 information items. They had an update on the arterial bus rapid transit for the system, the BRTs that have started, and then the ones that are being planned. The regional solicitation public input tool results, which we presented here, and then the regional solicitation project ranking and funding scenarios. And I do have several comments from TAB, but what I'll do is hold off on those till after the presentation.
on the
WebEx
electric
Assistant is
buses
enabled to
charging
save audio
station.
highlights.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chair. This was a grant that we were awarded through MnDOT, and working with MnDOT, it was determined that the proper avenue for the funds to flow would be through Met Council. And that process just took longer than expected to make that transfer occur. Plus, there was a lot of discussion around eligible costs, being that federal funds were involved, and there was some rescoping of the grant that had to occur as well. So those are the primary reasons for the delay.
All right, thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. All right, anybody have questions for Joe or Matt on any of those streamlined tip amendments? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve action transmittals 2022-40, 41, and 42. To recommend the Transportation Advisory Board recommend adoption of those. Of those three items.
Mr. Chair, this is Keel. I would make that motion.
All right, thank you, Carl. Appreciate that. All right, folks, we have a motion in front of us. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have didn't catch who that was. Brian. All right, thanks, Brian. All right, folks, we have a motion and a second in front of us to recommend to the Transportation Advisory Board the adoption of action transmittals 2022-40, 41, and 42. Any further discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Joe?
McPherson, I believe, left. Robjent,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Ellos,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Freeze,
Aye.
Leitner,
Aye.
Witter,
Aye.
Kotsukos,
Aye.
Peterson.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Harrington, I believe, was not here. Solberg,
Aye.
AO,
Aye.
Reef,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Eddie,
Aye.
McCullough,
Aye.
Keel,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Oehme,
Aye.
Ellis,
Aye.
Brodhag,
Aye.
Ashfeld,
Aye.
Thompson,
Aye.
Culver,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Vole,
Aye.
Kurtz,
Aye.
and Dermody.
Aye.
All right. The motion passes. That'll move forward to tab those three streamlined tip amendments in 2 weeks. Moving forward, just do this check-in here with Scott. Scott, any updates, any issues coming out of the Planning Committee or TPP Technical Working Group? You there, Scott? Maybe we lost him.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, sure
Okay.
can.
Sorry about that. So TAC planning was canceled in September and will also be canceled in October due to lack of action items. But the TPP technical work group did meet in September. Just some highlights. We went over the TPP goals review, public engagement and update study. We also went over the upcoming regional transportation and climate change multimodal measures study and the performance evaluation report. And there was also some discussion of land use models, regional COVID impacts, and freight and car sharing as it relates to the TPP. For October, the TPP work group will continue policy discussions about the climate action work plan, congestion management process, and policy gaps in the 2040 TPP. Also, just a quick update, Angie Stenson, our vice chair of the TPP work group and I had an opportunity to meet with council staff last Tuesday, I believe, to talk about the TAC had asked TAC planning to talk to staff about developing an action plan for collecting a minor arterial performance measure data. And really kind of the purpose of that effort would be to develop some baseline conditions of the existing system, some performance trends, and maybe some strategic targets for things like pavements, bridges, crash rates that could potentially help us with allocating federal funds to the various solicitation categories like spot mobility and safety, strategic capacity, reconstruction, and bridges. So we had a good discussion about that, and maybe Steve could help me out if I'm going to miss anything here. But I think the major takeaway was that staff do not have capacity in the existing work program to lead the discussion, but they do have consultant funds to support a study in 2023. If we wanted to do the study in 2023, it's staff's suggestion that it would be a county-led effort to support the conversation. And so I guess there was a bunch of other things that we talked about. Not sure how far you want to get into the weeds on this, but I guess that's sort of the main takeaway where we're at right now, I guess.
No, thank you, Scott. I think appreciate the update on the discussion that TAC had asked you guys to have. I don't know, Steve, if you have anything you'd like to add as far as availability or when it may come up in future UPWPs.
Yeah, I think Scott gave a good overview on a productive conversation that we had with a few members. We're doing as far as our next steps, we're doing a lot of kind of related projects at the moment. One of those is a TSPE, Transportation System Performance Evaluation, and we're doing other measurement in the regional safety plan. And there's a bunch of efforts that are kind of like swirling around, I think, this concept that Scott's talking about here. So our first step is to kind of take an inventory of what we've done, what we're going to do in the near future, and then see where the gaps are, and then start bringing that back through the committees to see what the possibilities might be. So more to come.
All right, thank you, Steve, and appreciate that the update, and continue to work with TAC planning about what that looks like in the future, and then we'll continue to seek some feedback. Thank you. All right, anything else?
This is Lyndon. Quick question on that.
Go ahead, Lyndon.
So is that study in the work plan then, or?
The study is not currently in the 2023 MPO work plan.
But
Lyndon, anything else there?
But there's money available to do it. So why can't we get it in the work plan?
I guess that'd be a question for staff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So that would be something we would amend into the UPWP. Of course, you saw that it came through the committees already, which isn't that big a deal to amend it in. To get to that point, I think we'd have to further scope out what we'd want to do, and I think that's what we're looking for. Maybe some additional help and conversations on is what exactly would we be doing and what would be the cost of it, to get some consultant help to lead us through that. So I think that it's an amendment process and then kind of further scoping out kind of major tasks. Yep.
Steve and Scott, maybe that's, I don't know if that's something TAC planning has some interest in, but maybe you could help with what the parameters of that might be. And then, and as I understand it, Steve, there's a staff, really a shortage, but that doesn't mean that we can get it set up. Maybe it moves forward in later 23 into 24 when maybe there's more staff capacity to work on something like that.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I think you worked yourself into some more responsibility on TAC planning, and appreciate that.
I appreciate the guidance. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else with comments on that? or for Scott? All right, anything else at all, Scott, from you?
I think that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving forward, we'll move to funding and programming. And Paul, I understand you took that last meeting. Is there anything to cover?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did set it for Chair Thompson on this meeting. We did funding and programming didn't meet on September 22nd. We had one business item just to review a late solicitation scoring appeal. Funding program did review that item and did not recommend any changes to any of the scoring measures. So that process now, and then we did review the informational items that is on this agenda as well. So that was it for the funding and programming meeting.
All right, thanks, Paul. Any questions for Paul on funding and programming? Not seeing any. We'll move forward to our information items for the day. We got our first item, Highway Hsip program, and Corey from MnDOT Traffic is here. Corey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you can see here, here's the list of the 2022 proposed Hsip funding list. I will note that this list has a couple changes from the list that was shown in funding and programming a couple weeks ago, due to some changes having to do with whether or not projects should be funded from kind of multiple areas. A couple projects moved off, and then a couple moved on. Also, I think I noted at funding and programming that we had a couple projects that didn't make it to the scoring committee and to be scored. We're in the final stage of trying to resolve that issue. At least one of those is potentially going to move on to the list. From the list, you can see that compared to previous years, there's a significant number of significantly more projects than previous cycles, primarily due to the additional IIJA funding. And I mean, that's a significant increase. This go around, we're looking at about 63 million total in projects versus I think the previous cycles were about 32 million and 23 prior to that. The breakdown roughly worked out to about 22% for MnDOT, 57% for counties, and 21% for cities. If this proposed list becomes final, so I guess I'm finished, pending some questions from the people here.
All right, Corey, appreciate the quick overview. So you said there's still some changes here from these projects,
right?
As I understand that were mailed in, not emailed,
correct,
but made the timeline, and so those have now been scored and are being evaluated, or
right. We're waiting for the applicant to get back to us regarding resolution of that. We wanted to, we're working through it with a resolution that was proposed by the applicant, and it wouldn't change any of the numbers shown here in terms of funding. It would just potentially replace one of the funded projects with a project that happened to be a higher priority for that applicant.
okay. Any questions for Corey on the Hsip list at this point? Not seeing any right offhand here, Corey. So again, what is the timeline for finishing up on this?
We were hoping to have it finalized by by this meeting, but like I said, we're just waiting for the applicant to get back to us for that resolution. We're hoping to have that resolved in the next couple days, and then by the next time that this list would be seen, hopefully all those changes would have been made.
Okay, appreciate that. I think that answers the question for me. I wanted to make sure we were still in line with the rest of the solicitation.
And if anyone has a question, that heavier line there is just kind of a that gives you an idea of the additional funding that, you know, due to IIJA funding, projects that are now getting funded that probably wouldn't have in prior cycles. So it's a significant increase, and we got a lot of really good projects.
All right, thanks, Corey. Steve, you have a comment?
Nope. Yeah, I think Corey beat me to it. I was going to mention this, the same thing, and we put those on the regional solicitation tables too. That kind of solid black line, as requested by TAB, and then our transportation committee to really, you know, in this case, you got a doubling of funds, essentially 30 to 60 million. So it's pretty significant. Where you can see, you know, what do you get with the new money. And then at F&P, we did have a question too about the sequencing, and this will be an action item starting October at funding and programming. So it'll follow the same path as the rest of the regional solicitation. It'll be a separate action item, but same approval schedule.
Okay, thanks. Yep. Thanks for that, Steve. All right, folks, any questions for Steve or Corey on the Hsip program? See the list. I'm assuming, I guess I haven't seen this list, so will that be mailed out after it's finalized, emailed out? Okay.
Yeah, yes, it will. We were kind of waiting until the very last second to see if we could finalize that one project change, but we didn't get it resolved in time. So we will be sending out that new revised list once that's resolved.
Right.
Chair, note that I did send this to members about an hour ago, but we'll send out the updated one when that comes.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yep, go ahead, Carl.
So on the reactive projects, there's the first clump of projects that are funded down to the red line, and then it says the projects below are not funded. And then on the next page, the remaining of the list, it says the projects down to the red line are funded. I presume that's part of the unfunded, the last part of the table. Now, if you go to the next page.
Okay.
I'm sorry, keep going down to the reactive projects. There. Are the
Oh, yes. Yep, that's
table that should not funded there.
Not funded. That's a continuation of.
Thank you.
Of the previous page.
Okay. Anything else here for folks today? Any questions? I am not seeing anybody raise their hands. So Corey, appreciate it. Thanks for the update, and look forward to seeing the updated list here shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Thanks. All right, moving on to our second informational item for the day, and we are cruising along record time, so you get all kinds of time, Steve.
Let's keep it going. All right.
Regional funding scenarios.
Joe, are you able to bring up the PowerPoint, or do you want me to share here? Okay. Are you able to make it any bigger?
Do the presentation mode.
That's okay to start with.
He's trying.
Yeah. So next slide, please. So first, the schedule. Again, this isn't regional solicitation is an information item, but we are on the heels of starting to send an action item through the committees. So next month there'll be an action item here at TAC, and then looking for a slate of projects recommended November 16th at TAB. And then this does go for concurrence all the way through the full council, which is mid-December. Next slide, please. Wanted to bring you up to speed on what's happened since the last time TAC saw this. Remember, we did a joint meeting with Funding and Programming the first time you saw the draft list, that is. First, there is a rule stating that you can't be funded with both Hsip and the regional solicitation, and we were partially funding some projects with both funding sources. So F&P gave us some good feedback here to kind of strictly follow that rule and further clarify what needs to be clarified for the next cycle. So in doing that, those projects opted to take the regional solicitation money versus Hsip because the maximum amounts were higher. So that changed a few things on the money available and then allowed us to get 2 more projects in Hsip. So that was number 1. Number 2, we heard at TAB meeting and then via memo and then at F&P a little bit about funding the 5th project. There's 5 bridge projects submitted. We're using the on-system bridges to fund that bridge list this cycle, a new funding source. And so after we had several kind of meetings after TAB with MnDOT state aid, et cetera, on kind of the purpose of the on-system bridge funding and what their expectations are, we think we do need to fund that 5th bridge project and are showing that in purple on the funding scenarios. That would amount to about $20 million going to bridges. We have $22 million available on bridges. And so we'll catch back up on that target amount next funding cycle and potentially even do that in 2027 to fund another bridge to kind of catch back up there. But the expectation is we show kind of a clear accounting that this is new bridge money. It's going to new bridge projects. And so that's what is being asked of us with this new funding source. So that's why we're showing funding all 5 bridge projects. To balance the books there, we did have to increase over programming from 9 to roughly 10.5 to 11%. And then we did remove 2 roadway projects. One of them a traffic management technology project that was 3rd on the list, and then also a spot mobility and safety project that was a Hennepin County. So the Hennepin County gets a bridge added, but then they lose a spot mobility project as a result. So just kind of full transparency. How did we make the math work? That's how we had to do it. Increase over programming, took away 2 small projects. So number 3, we did talk a little bit last month about this kind of kooky BRT projects rule, I call it. And so that's as the rule reads on the screen, the combined maximum funding for bus rapid transit projects funded will be 32 million. So 25 after you subtract 25 million for ABRT, arterial bus rapid transit for the G line, that leaves $7 million in transit expansion and transit modernization. And we'll show you on the screen here in a second kind of what that does. But we didn't get great clarity from TAB on how to approach that rule. So at the moment we are showing following kind of strict order of the law, following that rule to a T until kind of told otherwise by our TAB committee. We do have some extra transit money. You'll see a bottom row in transit called yet to program. There is some extra money there, and we want to get some feedback here today on what your recommendation might be for it. We've got about $3 million in the midpoint scenario and about $2 million or so in the Bikeped Heavy scenario. And so kind of the question is, what do? Do you kind of partially fund another transit project? Do you shift it to another mode or do something else? So that a little bit of guidance there so we can narrow down this list, kind of get to a final resolution. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, we did hear from TAB, and then also our transportation committee recommended that we put some of the carbon reduction money into this regional solicitation cycle. So that is 2 years, 2023 and 2024. million a year, so that adds up to $16 million. And based on feedback that we received, we are showing that a couple options. We'll go through that on the screen, and putting that in Bikeped. People, I think, notice that tab that, we're going about 50 to 60% of the way down the roadway list, almost 100% down the transit list, and maybe 20 to 30% down the Bikeped list. So Bikeped's an eligible project in carbon reduction. And so we got some feedback that that's where we should land and put those funds. There still is 25, 26, 27 and beyond carbon reduction funds. And what we heard from our transportation committee and others was to hold on that, wait for some of the planning to catch up. The money's still there, goes to the MPO, but wait for the state's carbon reduction strategy to be completed and submitted to USDOT. And we've got a few other studies in the hopper that can give us maybe the planning framework for what the best use of that money is moving forward. So that's why because of timing, that's why 23 and 24, we got to make decisions now. We'll hold on the rest of the money and come back to it. Next slide. One other outstanding question is the unique projects, and this is a slide that you saw last month. We did have 2 technical committee meetings, and we gave, I think, some good feedback to the scoring committees, and the scoring committees are TAB and council members asked to score these. Their second meeting is, final meeting is next Monday morning, at which point they'll recommend to the full TAB to fund either 0, 1, 2, or 3 of those unique projects. And so those project requests equal $3.8 million. So there may be a scenario, not scenario, I should say, it may be an opportunity that some of that money comes back into the solicitation to fund capital projects. Maybe not though too, but that's still an outstanding question on some of that money up to $3.8 million, what that recommendation is going to be from the scoring committee. Next slide. So as far as the next steps, what we're going to be asking of funding and programming here as part of the action item in October, and you maybe remember this from earlier cycles too, is to forward. I think we've got two pretty solid scenarios or options to forward those options with pros and cons and other technical feedback that they'd like to provide up to TAB and then making the decision. So there'll be 2 separate action items. One will be select a regional solicitation funding option. So that's either the midpoint, the blue, or the Bikeped Heavy, orange. So kind of select one of those, step 1. Step 2, separate action item. What would you like to do with the carbon reduction money? And we've got kind of 2 options for midpoint, 2 options for Bikeped, and maybe, maybe there's some shifting of that as we go through the process too. But so 2-step process, and at TAB, and that's how funding program you'll see it later in October. 2 separate action items. So what I think we're going to be tasked with as TAC members is developing the pros and cons list, both for midpoint versus Bikeped Heavy, and then also for the carbon reduction options. And we'll start. We don't have to get through. Might be tough to do off the top of our head here today, but if we can start thinking about that, and then we'll come back to it next month too, and kind of keep adding to what our technical committees want to bring forward the policymakers. I think that's the last slide, right, Joe? Yeah. And so I know we have one hand up here, Mr. Chair, but then I do want to kind of show some of these things that we talked about on the actual funding scenarios, and then generate some feedback there.
Yeah, go, Steve, show that, and then we'll get to Brian and Lisa.
Okay. Joe, if we could shift over. I've got it on my screen too, if you want me to. All right, let's go to the bridge list maybe first here. So one thing that TAB asked of us is to kind of show these different funding sources in different colors. So bridge now is shown in purple, that 20 million of bridges, and then carbon reduction, separate source of money shown in green. So this is showing all 5 bridge projects being funded. So let's go to the next page, Joe, if you could. Let's zoom in on transit modernization. little bit more if you could. I can see it on my screen, but so this is the bridge rule that we were alluding to earlier, and the impacts of the rule as we're following it. So in this case, what happens in transit modernization, based on the rule, is we would skip the 5th project on that list, City of Apple Valley project, because we would have exceeded the $7 million maximum for BRT. So this $7 million maximum comes from the transit expansion list up above. It's a Washington County Park and Ride project on Gold Line. So that higher scoring project, that takes the 7 million. So we've kind of exceeded that max. So because of that, then we skip over Apple Valley and go a few blocks south on Cedar Avenue to a MVTA project and fund that instead. $4 million. It's about the same request. 4.2 million is the project being skipped. 4 million is what would be funded essentially in its place. So that's kind of one topic of conversation. Then kind of in a similar vein, if you could scroll down a little bit, Joe. I did mention a little bit more. This is one area where there's still some money available in that yet to program row. So $3 million in midpoint, $2 million in Bikeped Heavy. And so what we want some feedback on today is how should we approach that as we bring these options to tab? We want to start kind of allocating the rest of the money so people have a full picture and make a good decision on the project list. You could partially fund the remaining transit projects on the list because there's not enough to fully fund them. That's one option. You could shift that money to a different mode. Again, it's only a couple $1 million, but you could shift it to roadways, could shift it to bikeped, and kind of go further down those lists with kind of this. I almost view this as a remainder here. It's a couple $1 million with the remainder of what's left, or do something else. So, getting a little feedback and discussion on generated on that topic, I think would be helpful for us as staff to kind of think about kind of where to do that and how to explain it to tab, and to see if kind of they agree with where we're collectively going on that, or if they want to do something different. So those are kind of two related topics right there. So then next slide. So here in green, you can see carbon reduction. So this we've moved from what was one column for midpoint to 2 columns. So it's the same project shown in blue. Just don't want to create any confusion there, but we do have two separate approaches on how you could look at carbon reduction. And there's maybe in other combinations out there too. We thought, hey, let's bring 2. One of them is to really hit it hard on multi-use trails. Kind of go as far as we can there, because we got 49 project applications, and kind of invest as heavily as we can kind of in that first list. So that's the first column, option 1. Midpoint option 2, as I'll call it, would do a little bit of each. It would fund some safe routes to school, some pedestrian, and some trails, kind of mix and match of all those different funding categories. And so, people can say, hey, I like this, or I like this one approach or that other approach. We did something similar in the Bikeped Heavy, which is the orange. First option, we tried to, in green, which is the third column there, carbon option 1, Bikeped Heavy. We're funding more in the trails category, and kind of see how far we can get down that list. And Bikeped option, carbon option 2, we're doing a mixture. We're doing, some trails, some safe routes to school, some bikeped. Joe, if you could just scroll down a little bit. In this scenario, you're funding nearly all of the pedestrian and safe routes to school projects with that extra 16 million of carbon. You just want to, except for one pedestrian project, looks like you're funding 9 out of 10 pedestrian projects and then 10 out of 10 safe routes to school. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, let's I see some questions coming up from the group, and I want to again transit area. We want to answer some of those questions, and then start thinking about kind of pros and cons of what's being presented here today. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. So I'll just go ahead since Brian and Lissa already have their hands up. We'll go ahead. It looks like Brian, you may have had your hand up first. So why don't you go ahead?
I just got a quick question. Is staff making any sort of recommendation regarding unique projects to the tab? Is there any sort of indication of support or lack thereof for those?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. The answer is no, we're not making a staff recommendation. What we did provide was all the technical comments that came from that technical work group that we had a few months ago, and that's what was provided. Elaine, you have something else? I see you pop on the screen here.
Yeah, that tab will be having their second scoring meeting coming up quickly here. I'm trying to get my calendar. What day?
Monday morning.
Is it Monday morning? Yeah, okay, Monday morning to review. They've submitted, the tab members that are on the scoring committee have submitted their scores to, I think it's Cole or Jed. And so they'll meet to review those and make a recommendation to tab.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Melissa?
I have a whole list of questions.
Go for it.
One is probably a little bit more of a comment. I think we need to do a little bit of work on cleaning up how the presentation then correlates to this table. I was really struggling to connect that slide where you were like kind of talking through like the updates options to then what shows up here. Like it's not obvious what the purple is, it's not obvious what the green is. And I think like particularly with this carbon reduction, so like if you're sending this out to tab or us, I couldn't figure out what the difference was between the two different carbon options for each one. And so if we can try to figure out how to explain this a little better, particularly for our tab members, if we're expecting them to think through this before the meeting, I think would be super helpful. Putting some sort of color key on this would be really helpful as to what the colors mean, because I don't think, unless I miss it, I don't think that exists. And then a couple general questions. One, remind me, the BRT question, we're asking ourselves at this cycle because of the additional funds. Is that accurate?
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First good feedback on, I think we need to probably bring a memo with this information to kind of round out the explanation. So I think that's good feedback, and maybe some color coding and stuff could help. So that's good. The BRT rule is something that's existed for what, 2 cycles now, Elaine? So it's not new, but in this case, you know, it has an impact, and we have more transit money, so we're getting close to funding all of the projects on the list. And so I guess the answer to your question, it's not a new rule, no.
No, I don't think this rule is new. Are we asking ourselves the question this time because of the additional funding?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I think that has to be really clear that, like, once again, on the slides in the memo is that there's a very specific reason we are, because this rule was debated, and I'm not necessarily against setting the rule aside. To me, this rule was established based on a dollar figure we were expecting. And so I do think there is probably some justification here to set it aside, but I think we need to be abundantly clear as to why we are asking ourselves this rule and spell it out in the slides or spell it out in a memo. Because I don't want people to look back at this 2 years from now and if we don't have additional money, to be like, well, we set that rule aside last time, why can't we do it this time? So I just want to make sure if that is the decision, it is very, very clear as to why it is. And then one other question, the TDM category, why are we jumping to the bottom? There's projects at the bottom of that list selected. Can you remind me again why it's that way?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So again, that's the innovative TDM category is we set aside and then fund the projects 2 years later. You're probably well aware of that. So this money is 24 and 25. We have enough money to fund what's shown in gray. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects. The last 2 projects, number 6 and 7, would if tab wants to fund those would come out of the transit category. So that's kind of, we had 2 more projects on the list. We had some level of extra money. Those amount to about $1 million. And so we're going back and funding out the rest of that list with transit money. So that's what's shown right there. If people want to do something different, I think, we have money set aside already for 1 through 5, and it's just a question of 6 and 7. Do you want to use the transit money that's left, that's remaining, to fund $1 million of the last 2 TDM projects?
Okay, that for sure was not clear to me at all. And once again, I think notes, like whether it's notes in this document or something, and this also could be me that I'm replacing Emily. I have not been on this committee for 8 years or something. So this could be on my end too, but a lot of this I'm having an exceptionally difficult time tracking why some of these decisions were made and what decisions are still, like, I don't think that decision as a question was listed in your PowerPoint, that's something we could consider is moving that money back into the transit category. But that's all my questions for now.
All right, thank you, Lisa. And to that last one, the gray threw me for a loop as well. Initially, it took probably the 3rd or 4th time I looked at it to figure it out. Those are the funded ones, and the additional are the carbon. All right, Danny, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So really looking at the Bikeped Heavy scenario in orange, if we go with one of those options, or we recommend one of those options, we lose 2 in the strategic capacity category, I believe, for 20 million. Is that correct? And we lose a transit project too.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always wins and losses, right? But that is the big question here. That is the impact of going Bikeped Heavy, which I'm actually supportive of, because we've been discussing this for many years about the numbers of projects that are not funded in that category. It gets the most applications. One other thing I did is I went through the list and looked at, in the other categories, at some of the scores. And, when you look at the Bikeped projects, the ones even that are off the list that aren't making it still are scoring very well within the parameters that they're scored, when compared to some of the projects that are awarded in, say, transit, which have really low scores. I believe there was one of like 200 that's getting awarded, and their score was 200, and the top score was 9 something. So there's that. And also I did have a question about, in the roadway reconstruction modernization, there's, in the Bikeped Heavy scenario, there's a project that gets funded for 7 million. Could you clarify why more roadway projects are getting funded there in that Bike Heavy scenario? And maybe it's a simple oversight on my part that I missed and don't understand. But I do think we need to have a pretty good discussion about this, because we tried recommending lowering the amount to fund more projects, and TAB wasn't on board with that. We've got even more applications this year. There's obviously not enough money in the Bikeped category. And I realize by funding it heavy, we sacrificed 2 road projects and a transit project. But I think you mentioned there was like $2 or $3 million in unique projects that may go somewhere else. I know that doesn't make a $20 million gap. Doesn't fill that gap very much on those road projects, but could we look at some creative math here and try to backfill some of those road projects with other money and still get our Bikeped Heavy scenarios? But those are my comments. I know I rambled a little bit, but I do have a question about that roadway project for 7 million.
Yeah, good. Mr. Chair, if I may answer here, and members. So I heard some good, actually pros and cons kind of coming out in Danny's comments here too, that I made note of, kind of the percent of maybe total points. And some of the projects in the Bikeped areas was pretty high for unfunded projects. So the difference between midpoint and Bikeped Heavy is $16 million is shifted to Bikeped and Bikeped Heavy. That comes based on the midpoint. So it's about $11 million from roadways, $5 million from transit. So that's where the money's coming from to get $16 million over to Bikeped. We tried to give you a little different flavor in roadways with Bikeped Heavy. So that's why we took away 2 strategic capacity projects and then added back.
I see.
Added back 1 reconstruction project just to give a little different flavor for what you could do there to differentiate even in roadways what you would get. So that's the difference, but the math should add up. Yeah. So
And
still
that
the
project,
$16 million.
I'm sorry, Steve. So that project that you added back in roadway, that's what, Waconia. But you took away a project in Carver County, but both are in Carver County.
Mm-hmm.
On that strategic capacity project was Carver County, one of those losses. Okay.
That was to balance out the funding.
Yep. I'm thinking geographically too. When I can't, I mean, there's a lot of parameters, right? There's resubmittals to consider. So yeah, I mean, those are my comments. I mean, I think we should take a serious look this year at this Bikeped Heavy scenario. Have we ever recommended that? I don't believe we have.
It's been a scenario in the past.
Yep. It's been a scenario, I'm sorry, but we haven't advocated for it. We just presented it.
John, did you want me to go through the tab comments?
Yeah, Elaine, I apologize. We skipped over you. Yeah, if you can go through the tab comments, what their kind of direction from the policy side was, that would be ideal.
And most of it, Steve has gone through. He's incorporated into his presentation and the funding scenarios. I'll just go through them all, and some of it might be a little bit repeated, but just to give some background on it. So first, there was discussion on the BRT 7 million maximum and flexibility for funding the projects. And then because there's additional funding, there's a comment that the 7 million maximum could be set aside, or an option would be to prorate the 7 million up. And again, it was just a couple comments on that, but no direction. The increased amount of funding at a later date than when the applications were released may have impacted the categories that applicants applied in. And they requested this staff to indicate the projects with the original funding expected versus projects that were added with the new funding. And then this is additionally about 30% funding. So there was some comments of possibly using the modal funding ranges with the original money, and maybe looking at the IIJA money differently. So that may come up for further. There was no direction, but that was a couple comments on that would give them more flexibility on where the projects, maybe more trails and that if it came out of some transit and roadways. So just, that's hovering out there. There was discussion on the distribution of funds within the funding modes based on the number of applications submitted. And staff did advise TAB that they could make recommendations for distribution of the funds within the modal category. So while it was discussed, there was no recommendations of different ways to look at that. So there might be some proposed at the next TAB meeting. And then they requested staff to indicate projects that could be funded by adding carbon reduction funding to the scenarios, particularly to the trails category. And they recommended not having a separate solicitation for this carbon reduction funding to save applicant resources. They requested that staff indicate projects that have received federal earmark funding similar to those marked for equity and those resubmitted. And then there was a question on whether earmarked funding on projects could be considered in future scoring. There was questions on the funding allocated to the bridges, and a couple members suggested allocating the original 10 million targeted plus the new bridge funding to fund all the bridges. And so all the bridges are indicated as funded. There was discussion on the points that are awarded to project. There was concern of funding the lowest ranked projects in some of the categories. It was noted that projects are rated against projects that are submitted versus a metric. And for some categories, the total points were awarded in the full range while others are not. And they requested staff to look at the points assigned to measures in the next round to see if that's causing some application categories not to get fully awarding of points to applications. And then Barbara also recommended that staff set up a virtual workshop to discuss the scoring process at the request of some TAB members not understanding it. We have several new TAB members who haven't been through this process before. So we have set up a workshop this coming Friday to go through. We get about a dozen TAB members and alternates that have signed up for that because they aren't familiar with the scoring process, the scoring committees, the appeals process, and to getting these points, and wanted to have that conversation out of a TAB meeting. And it was noted that rules don't allow funding of projects for both Hsip and regional solicitation funding. And so they recommended not to fund both types of funds to projects. There's a concern about the option of awarding funding to partially funded projects from the previous solicitations and the precedent that would set, as it has not occurred in the past. And then the Vice Chair Gittell did request TAB members to send more information on requests for additional scenario recommendations. And I've only received a few, but so far most of it fell in line with these comments. So I'm not getting too much surprises.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Elaine, on that. And I think, a couple of those, certainly, Steve, you've covered the bridge and the carbon scenarios. I think the interesting piece, and we'll just, I'll go to, I think Lyndon is next, unless Danny has another comment, but that the TAB was, as you said, there were a lot of comments, but there was really no consolidation around one direction or two directions other than this is what it seemed to be. And then just various questions other than a couple of those areas, which were maybe more specific that you guys have already acted on. So Danny, did you have another question still? I want to make sure.
No more questions. I'm happy with the scenarios you have here. And I mean, are we planning on sending them the 4 scenarios, or do we want to narrow this down? What is the goal of the discussion now, to be okay with what staff has put together here? Because I mean, I like these options. I think they're, other than a little more explaining on the colors, like one of the other committee members mentioned, I think that would help with clarifying and making it a little easier to understand. It was easy for me to understand, but I had to do a lot of bouncing back and forth, right? But yeah, no, I don't have any more comments other than I think this is a great start, and look forward to more conversation.
Yeah, Danny, and to answer your question, I think the intent here for TAC, if we can get to it, is really, right, you see the scenarios, there's bits and pieces, tweaking here and there, but recommending pros and cons on each of the scenarios. And I think, right, so the way Steve laid it out, right, one scenario might be concentrate more on our whatever, let's say modernization, and we like that, so that's a pro because it addresses safety and whatever else more than maybe something else does. Or you could take that to the bike heavy scenarios, spend more on trails, then that's a pro, or maybe that's a con because it doesn't address all the other bikeped needs. Transit, we can do the kind of the same things here, but the idea is to give TAB some direction from TAC, right, about what scenarios, what are these pieces that they need to consider in selection of alternatives. And that's in part why I think staff is not making a recommendation, because it really needs to come from the technical professional standpoint of TAC. I mean, these are all good projects. It's just a matter of what are your considerations, TAB members, and we need to try and address that. I imagine we're not going to get through this entirely today. So I think what I am going to ask ultimately is TAC members go back at the end of this as well and provide some pros and cons and then allow staff to add those into that discussion as it moves forward to tab. Right, and I think we've heard some various pieces of pros and cons here already, but with that, I'm going to go to Lyndon.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a couple questions or comments. Going back to the transit funding, it seems like there's a lot of money there. I just wanted to go back, and maybe one of the suggestions is the previous solicitation, if I recall, the funding ranges were changed to put in, I think was shifted to put in more funding to transit and ped bike. So the percentage was tweaked, which changed the midpoint. Now we have more money. Maybe a possibility is, with that extra transit money, is to look back at what it used to be, the funding range, and go back to the way it was. That might, allow a little more money in roadway modernization. Second, so that's just a suggestion to look at that transit funding. The second one, obviously, we don't have a roadway heavy scenario. We just have a bikeped heavy scenario, which shifts, I think Steve said 15 million from roads and transits to bike. So, we're not, and I guess the reason I bring that up is you got to remember these road projects, and there is a high demand. You can see the amount of projects that were submitted, the dollar amounts. So there's still a huge need in the region for roads. And just to remind folks that every roadway project has a significant bikeped element to them. So we are improving the bikeped infrastructure in the region with every road project. So I don't like the fact that we kind of forget that sometimes. The trails, so to me, it's been a traditional suggestion. A tab is the midpoint seems to be popular, but I think with the carbon money, we have a great opportunity here to really basically fund the bikeped heavy scenario and the road midpoint scenario by using that carbon money to get to, so which option would that be? Scenario midpoint with carbon scenario 2 basically funds both the road midpoint and the bikeped heavy scenario. And I think there's even a couple more projects. And then just a final comment there. So that's the one I would suggest. And then the other one is that in the trails category, you can see the demand is really high, but if you look at the projects that are funded, I think this comes down to scoring. It's something that we should maybe look at, maybe with the extra carbon money that hasn't been allocated is, trails that are outside of the urban area. I think if you did a math calculation on the projects that were funded based on the TPP land use or whatever that is called, urban centers, urban.
Yep.
I think you'll find that the vast majority, probably in the 90%, are within those urban areas. So you can see there's tons of projects outside of those areas that can't compete. And, that's a significant issue for folks in those areas. So just bear that in mind. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lyndon. Appreciate the comments. And then we'll go back to Alyssa.
Sure. Another question, if you can help on this one. So in roadway reconstruction modernization, the Bikeped Heavy has one additional project than the midpoint. In there a large bikeped component to those projects? Is that why the bikeped project, like why is that 7 million there and not down in the trail or the actual bikeped categories?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this gets on Danny's question earlier, and so we tried to change the roadway up slightly between these scenarios, and so what you'll see is we added one roadway reconstruction project and took away 2 strategic capacity projects. So if you scroll up, Joe. So the two strategic capacity projects, 5 and 6, that are shown in the midpoint are within 1 point of each other. So close score there. So we thought a good option to bring forward would be remove those two that were scored essentially the same, and in its place add in the reconstruction project. But the net result is still the $16 million being shifted to Bikeped in either case.
Okay. And
So,
then,
so your question is, yeah, it's an addition, but still the net on roadways is a subtraction. Yeah.
and this may be a terrible idea because I don't know much about the Apple Valley projects and the, going back to the BRT rule, but they're in the same city. And is it worth having a conversation with Apple Valley, the county, MBTA on a priority there? Because like if they, because sometimes the scoring doesn't match where the higher need is, or like the tougher project fund or whatever it might be. And so is it worth talking with those folks? Or I don't know if there's anybody on the line here who feels comfortable responding, but it might not be worth us even breaking that rule if the parties where these projects are okay with how this is reflected here. But once again, I know nothing about either one of those projects or what's going on down there, but why break a rule if the applicants are all okay the way this is, okay, lowercase,
right,
how this shakes out. So that's one question. And then how is carbon reduction defined? Is there a larger definition that we need to be considering there as we're going through these, or is it pretty general?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Alyssa. So there is a specific definition and specific federal eligibility. There is a work group that MnDOT is leading just on carbon reduction, and they've met once so far, which is kind of why I had mentioned the planning still catching up to the money. But it's very similar eligibility to CMAQ. So basically any biped project, almost any transit project, some roadway projects that are more kind of traffic, congestion pricing, maybe some signal timing projects are eligible. But so most of roadways in the solicitation would not be eligible, is maybe a better way of saying it. So there is clearly defined definition, and it is to reduce CO2 from on-road sources. And that's the goal of the program with defined eligibility. Yes.
Okay.
And so we have had slides
it's eligible for those things, that certainly in those categories that they put it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something we were missing there on what projects are supposed to be defined as. And then final comment for now is, kind of back to Danny's point on talking about some of these categories that are funding, projects at the bottom of the list. And I'm saying this because this also came up at TAB. And so when we're talking about our pros and cons, I think, making comments saying, yes, we're funding, say, for example, if we end up, doing the Bikeped 2 carbon reduction and we go all the way onto the quote unquote bottom of that list, that just because it's ranked the lowest doesn't mean it's not a valuable project, but maybe talking more about, as Danny mentioned, that, in the Safe Routes to School, that lowest project still scored, 63% of the total, whereas, some of these other categories, that were, down in the lower percentage, for example, the transit expansion, some of those are at the 28th percentile or the 48th percentile. And so I would just encourage people to talk about making sure that we're talking about this, that these are not valuable projects. It's more so about the scoring. And then, is there a way to try to stick above the 50th percentile or something like that? I'm not quite sure there is. I was trying to do that, but as I'm going back and forth.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Oh boy, I think we're at Matt.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question and a comment. Question for Steve related to If we were to lift the BRT rule, I'm a little unclear in terms of how that would impact the transit category. Would we be saying that the other Apple Valley project wouldn't be funded, or would we move up to the expansion category and take funding away there? Can you provide some clarity there?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So I think what you would do if you were to ignore the rule in Bikeped Heavy, I think that was your question, right, Matt?
I think just a general question around removing the rule. I think it would impact both scenarios, would it not, for the Apple Valley BRT project?
Yeah, but it kind of the process we would have gone through if we would ignore that rule, we would have funded. So first midpoint. In midpoint scenario, we probably would have funded Apple Valley number 5 in the modernization and unfunded Southwest as the first kind of stepping stone in the process, and then in Bikeped Heavy, I think we would have funded Apple Valley and unfunded MVTA. We would have funded number 5 and unfunded number 6. That was based on, I think, the amount kind of requested and the scoring. And based on the process we would have done, that would have been the result. So midpoint, Southwest would be unfunded. We'd fund the 2 modernization projects at the bottom of the list. Bikeped Heavy, we'd flip flop number 5 and number 6.
Appreciate that clarification. And I think just some context is helpful in terms of, why the transit category has some of these kind of funky rules. I was part of the committee that was part of this rule change, and I can just so everybody knows the concern was primarily around BRT projects historically have always scored well, generally will score well, and there was concern among particularly suburban providers around the transit category serving as really kind of a de facto funding source for BRT projects and ensuring that we had a fair chance at the funding. And obviously I view this year as somewhat extraordinary in terms of the increased funding. We don't typically get to this scenario where all the projects are funded. So I hear the concern there. And then just as it relates to the scoring piece, and I understand the logic behind looking at different categories scoring versus the transit scoring, but I get a little apprehensive there only because each category is going to have its own unique set of scoring. So I don't really think it's going to be an apples to apples comparison if we start looking at percentiles of scoring categories. And so that's kind of my concern on that front. But I will say that I don't believe we'd be against looking at skipping or lifting the BRT rule this year, but I just would want to make it clear that it would be very much a one-time deal if we did do that. I certainly would, I don't want to speak for MBTA. We'd have to have some discussion. We're meeting with STA next week, and I can hopefully provide some clarity in emails and some of the pros and cons as well to staff. So I'll make sure I do that. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, man. Appreciate
Chair, can I add on to that?
Go ahead, Elaine.
Yeah, this was discussed at TAB, and there was concern about removing the rule and then switching which projects are funded, because applicants applied in the category based on the rules. And I think they would look at, if they added more funding, they would add a project, like add skip project versus switching the projects. Because there was a project that did not apply in this category, but applied in the trails category because of that BRT rule. They were skipped last time, so they figured this was going to continue to happen. So and this was a project that could apply in either category, where if this rule was going to be suspended, they would have applied in this category. And so that was that concern of changing the rules after the fact for that reason. So I think TAB is not likely to switch the funding, but add the funding. So maybe it will be funding the Skip one, but not the Southwest versus switching the MVT to Apple in the Apple Valley one. Because, you
Thanks,
know,
Elaine.
it
Matt,
changes the rules
anything
after
more
the
for
fact.
Elaine on that? All right. Thanks, Elaine. Innocent.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question directed to Steve. Steve, can you clarify a little bit? You mentioned that Bikeped projects about maybe 60 million for the first 2 years will be directed. The funding will be from the carbon reduction program. Then I think you mentioned that the future years would be funding on that will be delayed till the state comes up with the carbon reduction strategies, which is required by the federal government. Is that what you mentioned? We talk about.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the feedback or the recommendation we got from our transportation committee was we've got a time constraint here. So and we have eligible projects in a scored list and a process. So let's use that on projects that need to go now to use that money. And then the planning will catch up. And at which point we can have a further discussion on what to do 25 and beyond.
Oh, okay. Then also I would add that if Lisa want the have the requirement, the types of projects that can be used, as several of them that can be that qualify for the carbon reduction program. If you want, I can forward that list to her.
Yeah, Innocent, I think you, I know you have that list, so that could be useful for everybody if you want to.
Okay, yeah, I can send it to Joe, then he can maybe distribute to others. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, we still got some questions to answer here for Steve. So I know there was a lot of questions there, but a couple want to get to your questions, Steve, in part. Maybe how does TAC have comments on how to best approach the BRT rule? Maybe let's just start with that. I know a bit of it depends on the scenarios that go with it, but I'm thinking through the scenario like Matt had laid out with how BRT had normally scored. The next solicitation, I would venture we'll still have a good amount of IIJA money. And so, you know, will that be the case if we were to, I guess, withhold the rule from use during this solicitation? Would it be TAC's desire to withhold it for the next solicitation, which I think seems to go against what Matt was talking about when that was originally designated? So maybe think about it from that perspective as well, and how you want to move forward. I myself thinking forward for process wise, I get we got a lot of extra money. But I'm tending to lean towards let's hold to the rule and adjust that. But I think in the next 2 years we need to amend the rule so that these sort of scenarios where it's a capped dollar amount and we get additional funds does not come up. It might be a percentage or something different than currently what's written. So folks have any thoughts? I'd like to get that BRT one taken care of first and then go into some of our other questions. So Danny, is your hand up new or is that remaining? Oh, Lisa.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. That was an old hand.
Okay, Lisa.
I've been reflecting a lot on the BRT and looking at all the transit projects that are scored, and I kind of would support sticking with the rule and allowing that funding to either go to highways or helping with the backlog on trails. That'd be where I'd land.
All right, thanks. Alyssa?
Yeah, Chair, I tend to agree, and I think particularly with the context of that some projects chose a different category because of that rule. If this is going to be something we can break the rule, applicants need to know before the solicitation process so they can make strategic decisions on where to put their projects.
Yeah, good point, Alyssa. Very good point. All right, anything else?
See, Brian has his hand up, Mr. Chair.
Brian?
I concur with those thoughts. I think, and I would echo your comment about let's think about going forward, how we address this issue of if we do get another influx of more money, do we want it to be a percentage? But I would agree with both Alyssa and Lisa that the rule's there and we have some impacts that would be hard to untangle. We chose to step around that at this stage.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks, Brian. Matt?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chair. I concur with your sentiment as well as now, given Elaine's context that she provided after my comments, I would be more inclined to keep the rule in place given that context.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So I think we got a pretty good number here. Siding on keeping the rule. Steve, if others have thoughts, by all means, chime in. Otherwise, I think I would look for that direction to move forward with Steve to tab. The second part then maybe is that second question of, okay, if no BRT, how much was yet to be allocated, Steve? Is it between 2 and 3 million?
Scenario 2 to 3 million. Yeah.
Okay, 2 to 3 million. Folks have thoughts on, and I think Lisa, you already provided some, but I'd be interested in folks' thoughts and direction where staff should allocate that. And I see Matt, you have your hand up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, that was just a previous hand.
All right, Lisa.
Is there a way to break that tie in multi-use trails or to grab T16? I don't know. I know that 2 to 3 million doesn't equate to 5.5 million, but that would be my question. You know, we obviously, there was rationale in a different category of, you know, pulling a project in because it was 1 point difference. And so if we're doing that in a different category, then we best be funding a tie. So that, I don't know if we can make it happen by moving things slightly around, but that would be, or maybe the way to do it is to get rid of the two, 1 or 2 of the TDM. Is that the category? Yeah. Is that enough to be able to break that tie? Not sure, but that would be my comment on how to deal with that money.
Okay. Steve, I think I think that tends to lead towards maybe some scenarios where, or general direction of we shouldn't have a tie in any one of the scenarios.
I think if you wanted, Mr. Chair, if you wanted to do what Lissa is proposing, I think, yeah, you would take that, the excess money in transit plus, plus by the TDM, and maybe get some unique project money filtering back here, and the combination of 2 or 3 things probably could get you that.
Okay, and I think maybe as a larger recommendation, we could make that if TAB feels strong that there shouldn't be ties, TAC would recommend these areas for funding, but that's one comment at this point. So I wanna hold on that. But Brian?
Just had a question, and I apologize. I should know this. Have we built in, like, where are we at relative to thinking about over programming? And I'm not necessarily advocating for more. I'm more thinking that that's going to be something we'll need to be thoughtful about. And I'll just say that with this much more money in this solicitation, and we're talking about advancing some things, if I understand right, that we may want to be thinking about what that percentage is, and maybe we'd even tolerate it being a little higher this time. Does that sound? You understand where I'm going?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll let Steve address where we were with over programming and where we are as of the last iteration here. So, Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Brian. So the first time you saw this last month, we were at 9% over programming. With some of the changes, particularly on the bridge side, to make sure we are kind of meeting our obligations there, we bumped up that over programming to 10.5 to 11%, just below 11%. So I guess that's, we're probably getting on the edge a little bit there with, is at least my opinion on we're having less projects give back money. So going too much higher above that probably we'd have to dig into the topic a little bit more. But in talking to a few folks in state aid, they think they'd probably be leery about doing too much more.
Yeah, normally I would be too, Steve, as you're aware.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about with this much more money, and it doesn't feel like projects are getting easier to deliver. Yeah, we may see more attrition in this go around than we might normally see. That's where I was heading.
Yeah.
And so, if we're already 11, maybe it's not worth talking about, but and I'd lean on others to say if they feel like this is going to stretch the capacity either of their agencies or their industry. And none of us are going to say, gee whiz, yeah, we applied, but we can't deliver it. But just that it's, that it's going to be a big lift for us to increase as a region by what is nominally 40%.
And also remember, anything that's over programmed that doesn't withdraw, that money comes out of the next solicitation.
Yeah.
So if it's a higher percent, then we're having a higher total, so the amount is already higher. And then also I'm thinking with the funding that's not allocated in each of those categories yet, is that included in that over programming amount? So even if you didn't spend it, that could recalculate it down a little bit too?
Correct. Yeah. Just if I may just add, Mr. Chair, so I'm thinking about Brian's comment a little bit. If there's a project kind of on the edge, now we're at 300 million plus the carbon plus, we're plus 20 for bridges. So what are we at? 335. If there's a project that TAB wants to get to that's on the cusp here, that's going to make this everybody happy in the end. We got 3 to 350 million. And you can, if you're $1 million off this way or that way, I think there's got to be a little bit of discretion there too, but you just don't want to overdo it.
Yep. No, the good point is the total amount goes up, the percentage for these one-offs becomes a smaller percentage, smaller and smaller rounding error, as Brian used to say it when he was in that wonderful job at Metro. So, and I think, Brian, you brought up a good point. I think one of the things I'm a little leery of is we're adding a bunch of projects at a time when workforce is a little bit, well, just to say questionable at various times, not just internally in our agencies, but in the industry as a whole. So not sure that makes a big difference in what we have, because we have an amount of dollars to deliver out to the proposing agencies. So Lyndon, you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, just a final comment from me is I think, not to bring up an old wound, but with all these extra projects that are here and our partners at State Aid and everywhere that help us deliver it, I really think when the dust settles, we should bring up the federal funding reallocation or swap policy again, because I think we are going to have quite a challenge delivering these extra projects. So I think this is an opportunity to look at that more closely again and come up with a process that we can make that happen.
Okay, Lyndon, yeah, good point, right? Again, if we can put some of this together in one, it might make delivery for some projects easier to move forward. And I know we've committed to various aspects of TGB, women-owned, minority-owned businesses in some of those swaps before. So, all right, still trying to go to that second question. What do folks think about money? Should it stay? Maybe this is an easier question. With that money, leave it unprogrammed, one, program it in the non-motorized areas, two, or roads and bridges as a third option. I think that's where I hate to get too specific on this, because then we start it becomes this project versus that project versus what does the program look like. Thoughts on that? I myself would tend to say I think if we're not doing the BRT, that it goes to that non-motorized side. Others? Lyndon, you got your hand up?
Sorry.
Jennifer.
Mr. Chair, I would support what you just said. I think if the money is not programmed in transit, I think you get a higher benefit when it looks at some of the benefits in terms of safety, climate, greenhouse gas reductions, all that, if you go to the non-motorized category, and that's what I would support.
All right. So Innocent.
Yeah, Mr. Chair will support that too.
Okay.
You could, Mr. Chair, just what about traffic management technologies? That's another option, right?
Oh, that's certainly another option. Where are we at with? So we got a couple $1 million projects there. Innocent, you got your hand up?
No, I was taking it off.
Okay. Yeah, certainly there's another option there for folks to mull over. Chad?
Just voice my support as well for the non-motorized if it doesn't go towards transit.
Okay, all right. Anybody else thoughts where that might go? All right, I'm hearing generally more towards the non-motorized, but a potential in the traffic management technologies, right? That also reduces carbon emissions, can provide some of those other benefits. Not quite the same as transit, but more for efficiencies in the system. So, all right. Next question, Steve. Trying to go through my list here and find it again.
Yeah, it's really, start the thinking on the pros and cons.
Yeah.
If there's anything you at this time you want to bring to tab.
All right. So yeah, that's a great question as we kind of run through these, right? I think Lyndon, you had maybe a point earlier that I thought was an interesting pro for the midpoint with carbon option 2, in that particular scenario in the multi-use trails scenario gets you everything that the Bikeped Heavy option does, while maintaining I think shall I say a roadway focus through the rest of the process, and it distributes funds maybe more broadly across other non-motorized categories. So I think there's one that I think is just an interesting comment for that one. So other folks have other ideas, other thoughts on what's best for these. I knew this was going to be hard. I would, maybe I'll just throw out the, I mean, on the Bikeped Heavy side, of course, I think we've had a lot of concentration in the last couple months on safety. And Bikeped are most vulnerable users. And so I think on the Bikeped Heavy side, folks, whichever one makes more sense, I'm not sure, but maybe as an option, does provide the highest benefit to our most vulnerable users. Other folks?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think I'd concur with that last sentiment. You know, it feels like that's based on where the world is at today. It might be worth thinking about pushing in that direction. That if people are more localized, and this is again a place where some of the performance discussion would really help us.
Yeah, good point, Brian. Chad.
Yeah, I'd also like to support support that approach as well, and just kind of mention looking through that the Bikeped Heavy and just the multi-use trail option in the Bikeped Heavy. It does get down to an equity, there's a Ramsey County resubmittal, an equity bonus, St. Paul, a Scott County resubmittal. So it does hit some of those projects with some of those kind of extra call outs that we see as important. Thanks.
Okay. Other folks?
Mr. Chair, I do see something in the chat here, and I wonder if Danny would just mind reading that so people at home can get the full context too.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I was just to sort of echo what was just mentioned. A couple of these Bikeped projects that are on the bubble here are resubmittals, have equity bonuses, and so, for example, project T6 with the tie for project number 16. You know, it makes sense to me for Scott County to get awarded that project if we were in a scenario if we can't, it's one or nothing, because that is a resubmittal. To me, it makes sense to fund that project. I believe they've applied for that one like 3 times. Seems like it's always on the list. So it's obviously a really high priority for them. And the fact that they have no other projects awarded in that category, and projects 1 through 14. So I just want to make that comment as far as the tie for T14 for those projects. Those are one's a resubmit. Well, they're both resubmittals, and one has an equity bonus. So it might be easy to just say the one with the equity bonus gets it. But again, just want to make that comment. I think it makes sense in a situation where there's a tie especially for the Scott County and Three Rivers projects, for Scott County to get that project awarded. Just want to make that comment.
Okay. Jenny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll express my support for the Bikeped Heavy scenarios, and I'm still debating between carbon 1 and carbon 2 on those options. I'll note that in particular, when you get into PED facilities and safe routes to school, those are very safety focused. Everyone's a pedestrian at one point in time or another on their trip. And these projects generally are very low cost with extremely high benefit. So I like going down those lists further. I will say in trails that I think if we can find a way to fund both of the projects that scored, 703 points, whatever those are, the T16 ones, I think that's the right thing to do. And I think that we can do that given what's going on in the transit categories and potentially the TDM and unique projects. So that's where I would put my support.
Okay. Others? Thoughts? I think, Jenny, that's a good point again about the TDM transit, maybe bringing that over. and trying to break those ties. I think that fits that. Something that we as TAC haven't liked to see in the past is we want to see a clear delineation between the points. I mean, it's a little bit rough in this one because it's 703, 703, 701, 700. But 703 to 700 or 701 is better than 703 for both. So thinking about that a little bit, there's at least something that you just run out of money rather than breaking in the middle. So anybody else thoughts here? I was trying to look at the difference maybe in the midpoint. Really the midpoint bike heavy earlier or higher up in the more the roadway projects. And so if we didn't fund maybe some of that transit, I mean, there's some pretty high priced projects in there. Might be the difference between funding Waconia in the midpoint. I don't know if folks have, again, just trying to think of this. I hate to get into the projects again, but that's kind of where we're at in some level. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to amplify Jenny's statement about safe routes to schools, and I think that's an important one to say that it is. They tend to be cost and to the point about people being pedestrians. Those are ones that are pretty impactful from a community standpoint.
Okay, thanks. One of the other points, just it's not much. It's not much, Steve. But I think in this particular case, roadway reconstruction, I think the Metro still has a preservation first attitude, and so the bike heavy gets an additional project in the roadway reconstruction modernization. And so it's a very little pro on that side because it's just the one project difference. So, all right, folks, we're running low on time, but I want to make sure because there's an awful lot to absorb here that if we can in the next 7 days, so till next Wednesday, because staff have to put together some of these comments for tab. Next 7 days, if you have additional thoughts about what particular pros and cons on the scenarios are, that you send that to Steve and Joe so that they're able to track that, put that together as this moves forward to tab. And I'm sure they'll have some of their own thoughts, but make sure you talk to your staff if you have it, or your elected folks as well, so they understand your pros and cons. As has been pointed out, I think numerous times here today, this graph is difficult. This graphic is difficult in its own right. Add on top of that the nuances of the pros and cons, and it will make it extremely difficult for tab to be able to come to any kind of consensus. So with that, I'll give any other chance here for folks to throw out comments on the funding scenarios. Not seeing or hearing any. Guess, Steve, anything else that we need for you that you're lacking clarity on at this point?
No, I think yeah, you did a good job kind of leading the group through some discussions here, and I think we have a good starting point for our pros and cons list, and that's why we, I guess, want to do it over 2 months, because it's not easy to come to without kind of some thinking and look at it a few times and then maybe get some more ideas. So good ideas, and I think we're going to button up a few things as this goes to tab as far as kind of just the visuals and such, but that's good feedback to you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Steve. Appreciate the presentation today. Moving forward, other business. I don't know, agencies, any updates? I'd like the folks know about?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead, Anson.
Is the first one, just want to, I think it was already mentioned in the tab report, but I just want to mention that MPCA launched the Ministerial Climate Action Framework on September 16. This framework, the main goal would be to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. That's the new goal that we set up. Also achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And also address adaptation, prioritizing investment in the next 10 years on that. Then the second announcement that I have is that we have an RFP open for grants to small communities with population less than 10,000. And this fund or grant will be helping community residency planning that will help improving stormwater resilience and also reducing localized flood risk, improving the resilience of wastewater systems, reducing human health effects, and adopting community service ordinance and public spaces. Have a link to that, so probably I will send it to Joe to send it out to the committee. And the final one, MPC have a new opportunity or job opening in the climate unit at the MPCA. We're looking for climate and energy coordinator, which is the classification will be on planning director level state. So if you are interested, it's still open till October 14. So I can send this to Joe so that you can forward to the community members too. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Innocent. Anybody else with any updates for the good of the group? All right, not seeing any. I appreciate everybody being in attendance today. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the TAC meeting for the month of October. Thanks all. Appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.